Three, two, one. What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Modern video. And today I was thinking about all the stuff that's happened in the Modern format throughout 2023, and it's been in some parts, a pretty good year, and other parts, and probably most of it, a very traumatic year for a lot of players, especially if you like playing creature decks like myself. And I felt like I wanted to highlight three important things that I felt, really changed Modern and definitely kind of encapsulate kind of what the year's been. Obviously, there's going to be two really big ones that I'm going to lead into, but the first one I'm going to kind of get into, I think has a lot to do with like how the metagame shifted and really how crazy of a metagame Modern is just in itself, and the fact that it doesn't rotate and that the cards kind of find their way to the top. Eventually, if you're powerful enough, you'll get there. But of course, before we get into that, if you're not a subscriber to the channel and you want to see more content like this, you want to see Pioneer content and other longer form videos, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. And if you go down the link in the description down below, you'll find a link to the Discord server as well. Go ahead, follow over there as well, and come join the server. Talk about Magic, all great things. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the third biggest thing to me, according to me, in the Modern format in 2023. The first thing that I would like to point out is Indomitable Creativity and its historic kind of rise to the format and being one of the best decks to play in the format. And at one point being anointed as the best deck in the format to just not seeing any play at all whatsoever. And when I say not any play whatsoever, I don't mean that like there's one person at your locals playing it, so it's like, oh, like they're playing it, you're wrong, sort of thing. But mainly in the fact that it was like in the top three as far as like metagame usage, and now it doesn't even crack. I don't even think the top 10 at this point, and it's a crazy fall off just from how the format has kind of transpired, and the fact that putting an Archon into play on like turn 3 or turn 4, or having a way to put two Archons into play, just doesn't seem to be good enough. And with kind of the supporting cast as well being kind of like Ren and 6 and being Teferi Time Raveler, which has some applications in like some of the Cascade decks and some of the other control decks or other decks like want to interact in a way with Indomitable Creativity. And while I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you can't play like any of the elementals at all, which makes your matchup a little bit worse. We saw how good Fury was in the format. We've seen how good Solitude is in the format. And you can't play any of those cards when you're playing Indomitable Creativity because you need to be able to hit your Archon of Cruelty. And in the sideboard games or even some of the main board games, you have to have access to Emrakul as well to have like kind of a way to finish out the game. So it is kind of weird that a deck was this powerful and then seemingly really nothing's changed in the format. And I mean, you can say the same thing about Murktide, but Murktide definitely was a deck that was like pretty good throughout its entire run, and just maybe at some point like didn't have as much of a metagame usage, but not only rallied towards the end of 2023, but I think has always been pretty good. You just had to have players just play just a hair better with all of the Rakdos scam kind of running around. But Creativity had probably the biggest fall off of 2023. Not having really anything banned from it, having still all the same tools that it had access to, definitely had enough time to kind of innovate and kind of keep with the trends of the format. And then just, as kind of like Lord of the Rings came out and as like the format kind of went on, some of the decks that already existed just got better and went right past Indomitable Creativity and didn't really care about what it was doing. And other archetypes kind of spawned from those future sets coming out and just kind of overshadowed what Creativity was doing, and in part like kind of pushed Archon of Cruelty out of the format, still being one of the best creatures that you can reanimate, that you can cheat into play, what have you, but it's just not like that strategy as a whole just doesn't seem nearly as good as playing with Rhinos, playing with Murktide, playing Yawgmoth, playing, any of those other decks, even playing Scam today. I'm almost willing to bet that Indomitable Creativity has less of a play rate than, now Furyless Scam, which now plays sort of kind of like a mid-range deck with, the game plan of getting to still rip cards out of your opponent's hand. But I mean, by and large, big fall off, creativity. Unfortunate, you hate to see it because it was a deck that I was willing to kind of lean towards playing over Yawgmoth, and kind of glad that I got out of it when I did because, like I said, and I cannot stress enough, a historic kind of fall off for a deck that was at one point anointed the greatest deck in the format. So that is the the first bit of news. I think the third biggest kind of like news from Modern. So let's go ahead and jump over to the second one because these two are going to kind of go hand in hand with each other kind of as we move on. And I think arguably are going to be the biggest pieces of like news and everything from Modern in this 2023. And I think what the year is really going to be known for when you look back on it in history. So let's go ahead, take a look over to the next bit. I've definitely learned in trying to change images like while I'm recording that for some reason my computer doesn't like that. So, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to break it up this way. But, you know, uh, unsurprising to a lot of people, the Lord of the Rings Tales of the Middle Earth set that came out, part of Universes Beyond, was a straight to modern set, kind of like how the Modern Horizon sets are, except, well, I guess in the same vein because they are all cards that are or now straight to modern legal, with most of them being new cards. Of course, we've had some reprints in there. I saw that like Arbor Elf was like printed in like the Lord of the Rings set, whether it's the Commander set or the actual, which I think is actually reprinted the Commander set. But, you know, Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle Earth brought a ton of new cards to the format. Of course, the One Ring being the big one at the start of the format where people didn't think it was really that good. Turns out it's very powerful. And then we had like 4-color control and some other decks just kind of like jamming it in because they could kind of negate the life loss. And that, of course, you had Orcish Bowmaster who directly countered the One Ring. And even when the One Ring really wasn't seeing that much play towards the later stages of 2023, people found out that Orcish Bowmaster is still really good because even when your opponent just ends up drawing 1 or 2 additional cards, you can end up like taking out one of their creatures. When it ETBs, you can take out one of their creatures. You can just ping them. You can get like a 2/2 to a 3/3 to a 4/4 relatively quickly. In Yawgmoth, it was like a way that you could like sacrifice the body, and then if you got additional triggers, then you could get another one for free essentially, and kind of keep the train going. I mean, just those 2 cards just in themselves. And of course, we've had like Stern Scolding, which was a good card that people played for a while to kind of counter the Yawgmoth strategies. You have like the Samwise combo, where people were essentially playing like these Yawgmoth decks, but instead of, having your Undying combo into Blood Artist, you had this like Samwise and Cauldron Familiar combo. Just a lot of decks just getting some extra tools and things like that. Of course, like Flame of Venor. I can keep going on and on. Really, any card that ends up popping in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, this deck has this deck has that. So Lord of the Rings definitely breathed a lot of life into the format, not only creating a few archetypes of its own, albeit not nearly as powerful as the ones that, already existed, but still created those archetypes, improved on a lot of the other archetypes as well, and kind of brought some interesting pieces to kind of play with and bring to the table when playing Magic at this time. And of course, we got a Pro Tour out of this, Pro Tour Lord of the Rings, which, if I remind you, the last time that we had a modern Pro Tour to this point was when they were called Mythic Championships, and we had Hogak. So it's been a while since we had a modern Pro Tour. This was like the reintroduction of the modern Pro Tour, or a Pro Tour featuring the modern format as the main format of the event, and it definitely didn't disappoint. Of the Pro Tours that I watched at this time, the modern Pro Tour far and away had more viewers on average throughout the entirety of the event. The event was ran, really, I really liked it. I loved the presentation as always. The metagame not being as diverse because, as we know, Rakdos Scam kind of went from a deck that people played, but you really didn't see honestly a whole lot of it. And then when the Pro Tour happened and we got the deck list and everything, almost 20% of the field, a fifth of the decks were, a fifth of the decks were Rakdos Scam, and then the rest were kind of like, an amalgamation of what the format, we thought it was going to be. And Rakdos Scam ended up winning the whole thing, only putting, I believe, 1 copy in the top 8, but, that 1 copy being able to run the table against, like, 3 Tron decks, 3 Rhinos decks, and an Amulet Titan player. Uh, Just a crazy time, like a crazy few months, span where we've had a deck that people did play that all of a sudden took over the meta game, and of course, like instead of just taking over the limited Pro Tour meta game, just ended up in general taking over the modern meta and slowly gaining more and more of a share, almost up to a quarter of the entire meta game and deck lists that were being posted were Rakdos Scam, which is like unheard of because you've had decks that get to like 10-15%, and they're already looking at banning something from the deck to kind of nerf it. We saw it with like Hogak when everyone was playing Hogak. We saw Bridge from Below get banned, so then you couldn't do the combo, and the combo didn't matter. So then like Faithless Looting and Hogak itself got banned, out of the formats. Then like Is It Phoenix wasn't played as much because before Hogak that deck, and so on. There's so many other examples that we can show where when a deck starts to get too big of like a sample size and the format can't necessarily contain it on its own, which I think very rare, even though I think it's happened a lot more than it should have. I also think that it's kind of just a product of pushing design more so than, the fault of having a format that doesn't rotate, if that makes sense. So Lord of the Rings definitely kind of set the world on fire. I think in a good way, and of course, like caused some bad too. But I'd rather take some big swings and miss on a few of them than just kind of play it safe and not really change the game in any way. Because I think you have to make the game exciting and new, and Lord of the Rings definitely did that. And of course, as I've been saying in this, like Rakdos Scam is kind of at the forefront of this and kind of known for like the Lord of the Rings Pro Tour for being the deck that, everybody seemed to have brought, didn't necessarily do well, only getting one copy of the top 8, and then, obviously winning the event, which led to some interesting decisions where in the first Bann and Restricted announcement, we had priority on ban, which is kind of cool, but going on, the next and final piece of news, and I think the biggest thing of 2023, which I think honestly is like the 1B to this. This should be the number one thing, but to me, the other piece gets it because it's kind of the kicker and kind of the reason, I guess is the effect of what Lord of the Rings has kind of caused and the direction that Magic and stuff was going in. So finally, we have the Ban and Restricted announcement in December 4th, 2023, where we had a card called Up the Beanstalk banned as well. That card definitely is notable for its own reason, but it was kind of just degenerate in the first place. Like that card like that just didn't have any place in the modern format with the amount of free 5 and 6 mana spells, or the massive reduction in cost for a lot of those spells as well. But we had an interesting decision going into it. Was Fury going to get banned? Was it going to be Grief? Was it going to be Bowmaster? Was it going to be Ren and Six? What combination? Were we going to have multiple bannings, or were we only going to have one card kind of go away? And there's kind of some pros and some cons, obviously, of doing what they did. For those of you that may not know, Fury and Up the Beanstalk were the only cards that got banned. Nothing else got banned. Of course, there was some Pioneer announcements and some Pauper announcements as well. But of course, this is a video about Modern, so we're going over the Modern changes from that ban list. And Fury was a really good one to hit. Fury was definitely annoying to play against, especially if you're playing against Scam, because even though it was like the easier of the two to like block and kind of handle, uh, when most of the interaction that people were playing were Lightning Bolt, and people really weren't playing as many Unholy Heats, and your other removal was like the Leyline Bindings and such. You were pretty screwed. Like Fury was just going to eat and destroy like whatever creature that you could possibly end up playing, unless you were playing the zoo decks or whatever. But even then, like just another Fury kind of comes down and ends up beating whatever creature you play. It beats your Kavu a lot of the time, ends up beating like Tarmogoyf and whatnot. And then it just ended the game super fast, and you were essentially like putting resources on the board and having to not even trade those resources, just flat out lose them. And you could just end up getting hit with a Thoughtseize. You could play a creature to go block, lightning bolt it, hit you for 8, go. Just those sort of things kind of all played into Fury getting banned. Now, controversially, they left Grief alone. they left Bowmaster alone, and they left Ren and 6 alone. Now, depending on how you feel about those cards, like I am kind of in the boat of, making impactful changes and not making a ton of them. I think it's a lot harder to find problems. Like if we just play a format for like 2, 3 months and it's like miserable, like we just ban things and it's miserable. And it's like, okay, like let's find some more causes and let's start to get rid of them rather than just making a ton of sweeping changes and having cards that are on the ban list that don't necessarily belong on there. And I think that's kind of like early Magic is kind of just banning a ton of cards and we're just like, hey, we did it, we fixed it. And I think it's more of the fact that you banned every card that could potentially be a problem rather than cards that are actually a problem. And I think with the way Magic's changed, how we've evolved, and how we see the game, I think taking a more conservative approach to the ban list is a good thing. That being said, I would have personally liked to see Grief go. Bowmaster, you could convince me on for sure, and of course, like Ren and 6 as well, you could probably convince me on. But really, I would have loved to see Grief and Fury kind of, see you later and make Rakdos definitely more the mid-range deck that we had known it for. Really, before Scam ended up getting really big and before people even really played Scam. But things happened, and ultimately, we definitely got a lighter ban list, and so far the modern format has looked pretty good. Of course, it's kind of become what we expected it to become, where we see like Rhinos as the top deck in the format currently, at least as of the recording of this video. You have Yawgmoth that's up there, you have Tron, surprisingly, that's up there, Amulet Titan seeing more play, which again is surprising because I always thought that deck was pretty good, all things considered. Just now more people are playing it and putting up good results with it. We see Murktide, I think in the second most played deck currently in the format, at least by percentage of metagame. So definitely an impact on the format for sure. Rakdos Evoke has went from, this 20+% juggernaut down to this like 5%, respectable amount, where I'm sure there's going to be some times where, your game is ruined by someone evoking a Grief and taking your 2 best cards and then you never draw interaction for it. But if it's happening at a less often of a rate and that's like the only card that's really doing it, rather than your opponent putting a Fury into play and then also being able to kind of like kill multiple creatures for the cost of like 2 cards and no potential of getting it back, or for 3 cards and they just absolutely clear your board, even with a ton of toughness. Definitely overall, I feel like is a win, and I think the metagame is definitely trending in towards the right direction, and I will be definitely waiting to see how 2024 shakes out and if we end up seeing any other changes to the format or eventually what other cards get printed in other sets that could potentially push and break other decks in the format, which is always something that can happen due with the push design and kind of like the power creep of sets that we have seen for the last, I don't even know how many years at this point. And so that's going to wrap up the 3 big things that happen in Modern in 2023. If there's something that I missed or something that you think is bigger than any of these 3, be sure to leave it in the comments down below. I would love to hear your opinions and everything. Of course, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell so you know when videos get posted. And of course, it supports my content. Super free and easy to do. Takes like 2 seconds. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.